Let's move on to Eloquent. But first, we'll return to the users table, and I'm going to bring that back to what it ships with out of the box. Then, as you learned in the last episode, I can refresh my migrations. Okay, so have a look at your app models directory, and we'll come down to user. We refer to classes like this as Eloquent models, with Eloquent being Laravel's official object relational mapper, which is kind of a fancy, scary term that you don't need to think about very much. Just think of it as Laravel's way to interact with your database tables. Now, here's the key. Each of your database tables can have a corresponding Eloquent model. So if I have a users table, the corresponding Eloquent model will be the singular, user. And each instance of user will map to a corresponding record within the users table. And to be technical, this is what's known as the active record pattern. Real quick, let's see on Wikipedia. The active record pattern is an approach to accessing data in a database. Thus, an object instance is tied to a single row in the table, like we just discussed. So let's give that a shot. But first, we don't have any rows here. Let me show you how to create one with Eloquent. Now, we could either do this in response to a route, or you could boot up PHP Artisan Tinker. We'll do both. We can create a user in a couple different ways. We'll start with a basic version. I could say new app models user, and notice that full path, well, that's because the full namespace path is app models user. And notice how that maps to the directory names, which again is very common. Anyhow, we could create a user like this, or a little tip, if you just try to create a user without the namespace, Tinker is actually pretty smart, and it figures out you probably meant this full path, so I will do that for you. So it saves a few keystrokes when you're playing around. Okay, so what do we need for a user? Well, a user at minimum has a name, an email address, and a password. Let's set it. The user's name, and we'll do me again. The email address. And the password. Now this one is a little unique. As we talked about in the last episode, you never want to store passwords as clear text in your database. Instead, you want to encrypt them. Laravel offers a helpful tool called bcrypt. Simply wrap your password in a call to that function, and it'll take care of the rest, as you see there. Now, at the moment, we've set these attributes, but of course, if I switch back, they're still not represented here, and that's because we haven't yet persisted that change. Let's do that now. User, save. Save it to the database, and we get true. Okay, so now, if I give this a refresh, you've now created your first record using Eloquent. Also notice that these timestamps are automatically set by Laravel. Now here's what's great. If I switch on back, yes, you now have your user instance. You can access any of that data you require, the user's name, the user's email. I could say, well, actually the user's name is John Doe, and let's save it. Now, if I switch back and give it a refresh, we've updated the name. Or if we switch on back, we could find that user in our system. User, find, and we need to give it the ID. In this case, the ID is 3. Let's change it to 1. Now, find the user with an ID of 1. There you go. But what if we try to find a user that doesn't exist? Well, we get null. And that would make sense. In fact, it's what we did in the previous chapter. We could alternatively say find or fail, which we also did a couple episodes ago. And now notice in this case, you get that model not found exception. So you're starting to see some parallels with the previous chapter. And of course, that was done on purpose. What this means is you already know the introductory API for working with Eloquent. Now, what about fetching all users? Well, user, all. Or in other words, give me a collection, and you should already be familiar with those. Give me a collection of all users in that table. So if I were to create a new user, user name is Sally. And finally, we will persist. If I now run user all again, we should have a collection of 2 items. Now, we talked a little bit about collections, but let's run it again and save it to a variable. But we could do things like users, pluck the name. And this will give me a new collection consisting only of the names of each person. This would be equivalent to saying users, map over them, and for each user, return the user's name. Same thing, but pluck is easier to write. What else can we do with a collection? Well, maybe you want to grab the first item in the collection. All right, users first. You can often guess what the API is. Alternatively, you can use it as an array, like this. Get the first one, get the second one, which means you can easily pass these collections to a for each statement. For each users as user, echo out the name within a anchor tag or list item. Anyhow, throughout this series, we will continue learning bits and pieces of collections. But you're already off to a great start. So in the next episode, let's figure out if we return to that post class where we originally used the file system and YAML front matter to store the posts and their corresponding metadata. Let's see if we can transition that over to a post Eloquent model.